Shalom, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Pulse of Israel here in our eternal and ancestral homeland, the land of Israel, the Judean Hills. I am here today with Maurice Hirsch. Shalom, Maurice.
Hi, Avi. Shalom to you and to everyone else.
It is wonderful talking to you. For those who are unfamiliar, Maurice Hirsch is the head of the legal department at Palestinian Media Watch. And I wanted to talk to you today about two new laws that I saw you are involved in trying to get passed in Israel's parliament, and how to deal with Israeli Arab terrorists who are then rewarded by the Palestinian Authority. Can you give us more detail what these new laws are about and why they are necessary?
Okay, so I have to try and explain a little bit of background here. I'll give you the general goal of at least the first legislation. I'll leave the second legislation to after that because it's a little bit different, and I'll explain. For many years, Israel has been trying to deal with the subject of Israeli Arabs who are actively involved in terrorism against the state of Israel. Now, you have to understand, these Arabs see themselves not as Israeli citizens, not as members of the Israeli community, but see themselves as agents of the Palestinian Authority, of the Palestinian people. They refer to themselves as Palestinians. Their only connection to Israel in real sense is the fact that they have an Israeli passport, which allows them free movement to any place in Israel so that they can carry out their terror attacks, and the ability to receive government awarded benefits for every other citizen that's entitled to them, and in the same way to these Palestinian terrorists. So now for many years, Israel has been dealing with this subject. There aren't, I have to say, hundreds of Israeli Arab terrorists. I would say more that it's in the range of scores, not hundreds, but it's not a small amount. So for many years, Israel has been trying to deal with the question as to what to do with these terrorists. They don't identify themselves really as Israeli citizens. They identify themselves as Palestinian citizens fighting for the Palestinian cause, which is the destruction of the state of Israel. And so for many years, Israel has been considering ways to strip these terrorists of their citizenship and of their residency. The paths that have been found in general have been paths that involved some type of administrative decision being made by the Minister of the Interior that then requires the permission or the approval of a court. The new legislation that we were involved in suggesting this, that was submitted this week by MK Avi Dichter to Israel's parliament, says something different and something new entirely. Every one of these terrorists that are, again, Israeli citizens, just for the purposes of carrying out their terror attacks, receives a monthly salary from the Palestinian Authority any time they're caught and put in prison. So what the new legislation says, that any Palestinian terrorist who is seen and is found to be receiving a salary as a reward for carrying out an act of terrorism against Israelis will be seen as someone who has waived his right to hold Israeli citizenship. Now, this is a whole different kettle of fish, as they say. If the impetus for disqualifying someone from holding Israeli citizenship is an act of the government and an administrative act of a minister, and it's subject to a court decision, then the terrorists can always come along and say that, well, we didn't really intend to cut ourselves off from Israeli society. We still want to be Israeli citizens, and/or this act really wasn't sufficiently severe in order to warrant the disqualification of our citizenship. Let me just give you an example of an act which both the terrorists themselves and the courts didn't see as sufficiently severe to warrant disqualifying their citizenship. In 2011, Israel is involved in a military operation in Gaza following numerous terrorist attacks. An Israeli Arab plants a bomb on a bus in Tel Aviv outside Israel, the IDF's military headquarters, blowing up the bus. Thankfully, due to the awareness of the passengers, no one was murdered. The terrorist then claimed that that type of an attack wasn't sufficiently severe to cut himself off from Israeli society. The Israeli court, amazingly, agreed with him and said that this isn't the severest of attacks, and therefore his citizenship shouldn't be stripped from him. Again, the only thing that divided between the terrorist murdering 30 people and the terrorist not murdering anyone was really the awareness of the passengers on the bus that saw the bomb and managed to get off in time. Completely arbitrary and nothing to do with the terrorist. So the new law would say that since this terrorist is receiving a salary, and we know that he's receiving a salary from the Palestinian Authority, he will be seen as someone who is waiving his right to Israeli citizenship. When you waive your right, when the impetus for the waiving of your citizenship in a country comes from the person themselves, there is thereafter no right of appeal, no court to fight with. By taking money in return for trying to murder Israeli citizens, you are saying, I am no longer part of Israeli society. I no longer wish to be part of Israeli society. I no longer wish to be an Israeli citizen in order to claim the benefits that the Israeli government gives to Israeli citizens. I am a Palestinian. I see myself as a Palestinian. Therefore, I am asking you, the Minister of Interior, to see this as my request to waive my citizenship. That's the essence of the new law. It applies to Israeli terrorists who hold, or Palestinian terrorists who hold both Israeli citizenship and Israeli residency. And it also applies to Palestinians who have been in jail for many years and have all of those years been receiving a salary. In the next,
we lost you. What did you say? It applies retroactively to terrorists who've been sitting in jail for years?
It applies also retroactively for terrorists who have been sitting in jail for years. In the next few years, we're going to see the release of a number of terrorists who have been in jail for many years. People like Maher and Karim Yunus, who were convicted already in 1983 for the murder of an Israeli soldier. They are due to be released in 2023. They have so far received millions of shekels in rewards from the Palestinian Authority for murdering an Israeli citizen. Now, the legislation also gives these terrorists a way out, which I think is probably what will provide the law for its best defense when it's unquestionably going to be attacked in Israel's Supreme Court if the law passes. What's the defense? The defense says that if the terrorist agrees to return every agura, every penny that he received in rewards for the murder of Israeli citizens, he is then entitled to request that his status be reconferred upon him, that his citizenship be re-awarded, and therefore the whole impetus for the law, for stripping citizenship, for regaining your citizenship, is in the hands of the terrorist himself. If he chooses not to receive any salaries, then he will fall under the other regular Israeli laws that I referred to, and the courts will discuss whether he should lose his citizenship. If he chooses to take the money, he has now the onus to prove that he's returned every single penny before he will receive his citizenship back. So that's the first one.
Maurice, that's brilliant. It's brilliant. I mean, it's sad that such brilliance is necessary in order for the legislative to be able to punish terrorists who are Israeli citizens. But a brilliant approach you've taken with this law. I really, really do hope that it gets passed. Okay, and what's with the second law?
So the second law really addresses not a much smaller problem, but also an incredible problem. Imagine to yourself that you're an Israeli terrorist, right? And you've carried out a terrorist attack where you've killed Israeli citizens. And your family is now the benefit of payments from the Palestinian Authority because of and as a reward for your acts of terrorism. But the family doesn't work. So they're claiming social security benefit from the state of Israel. Really, there's a proverb in Hebrew that says, are you actually going to murder someone and then inherit their wealth? So here the terrorists come along, they murder Israeli citizens because they're Israeli citizens, but at the same time enjoy the benefits that the Israeli state grants Israeli citizens. So the second suggested law says that, again, any time an Israeli terrorist or his family is receiving any type of payment from the Palestinian Authority as a reward for an act of terrorism, that family will no longer be entitled to any social security benefits whatsoever from the coffers of the State of Israel. Very simple. If you're receiving benefits from a foreign enemy entity, you obviously shouldn't be receiving social security benefits from the State of Israel.
And especially since they're receiving these funds as a reward for killing Israelis. By any chance, do you know the amount or around the amount that Israel today pays in social security benefits to families of Israeli Arab terrorists who are sitting in jail?
Well, really, it's a very, very difficult amount to establish because we have so many different ways to receive benefits. An event that came up about a year ago, now that was discussed in court, was the father of an Israeli Arab terrorist, a kid who had been sent to prison for a considerable amount of time for committing a terrorist offense, was now asking for the Social Security Institute to grant him additional Social Security income program. That's one of the different lanes that Israel has. It's called Haftachat Achnasa, the promising of a minimum level of income. And when the Social Security Institution asked the father to explain all of the different income that he had, they saw that he was receiving an income from the Palestinian Authority and asked him about that income. They said, well, why are you being paid this income from the Palestinian Authority? He tried to explain that it wasn't his income and it was his son's income. It didn't matter. But there are so many different ways that Palestinians can or Israelis can ask for social security benefits. It's impossible to really put a finger on the exact sum that they're being paid, but we can as a general estimate can say that it's over hundreds of thousands of shekels every month that are going to the families of Israeli Arab terrorists.
Wow.
By the Israeli citizens.
Right. And again, and the purpose of both of these laws is to finally, correct me if I'm wrong, to finally give the state of Israel the tools itself to, one, punish Israeli Arabs who are terrorists, and also make them pay a price for accepting the horrendous pay-to-slay reward that the Palestinian Authority gives to them, even though giving them a chance to renege on receiving that.
That's exactly it. That's exactly it. It really puts the onus on the fact that both of the laws put the onus on the fact that once you agree to receive a payment from a foreign enemy entity as a reward for carrying out acts of terrorism against Israel, you are cutting yourself off from Israel. You're cutting yourself from your citizenship, from your residency, and from the social security benefits that Israel pays. Take into account, I mean, that as again, it's a small amount, and possibly some would say that it's negligible, but some of those social security benefits are actually funded by the families who are the victims of the terrorism. The families of the victims pay into social security, so really the victims are financing the payment of rewards to the people that murdered their family members. It's a crazy situation to be in.
Right. And just as an aside, I mean, I cut you off. What were you saying at the end, please?
That's what the new laws come and try and provide an answer to.
Right. And the sad situation is, I hope I'm wrong, but when these laws, please God, are brought to the Knesset floor to be voted upon, there will be a considerable amount of Israeli Jewish lawmakers on the left who will vote against them. I mean, I hope I'm wrong. I hope every single member of Knesset votes for these laws in order to stand up for the law. But I don't think I'm going to be surprised in not only the Arab Israeli parliament members voting against it, but even a number of Jewish Israeli parliament members voting against it, showing, unfortunately, that their sentiment, their care is less for victims of terror and more for standing up for the terrorists themselves. And unfortunately, not enough people care about that. Do you think I'm wrong about that assessment? I'd love to hear you say I'm wrong.
So I'm hoping that the number of Jewish parliamentarians, MKs, that will object to the laws is going to be negligible. Actually, on the laws themselves, there were members of the opposition that were signed on, and I think that these laws, similar to the freeze law that was passed in July 2018, will hopefully pass with large Jewish majorities, and with very few exceptions from at least from not only from the Israeli Jewish MKs, but also from the non-Israeli Jewish MKs that are members of the Zionist parties. For example, the Druzi members of parliament and who are part of the mainstream, while they may not be Jewish, but they're part of the mainstream Jewish and Israeli parliamentarians that don't deny the right to for Israel to exist.
I think that is a fabulous piece of good news to end this interview with. So thank you very, very much, Maurice, for all of the very important work that you are doing on behalf of Israel and especially behalf of victims of terror. So thank you.
Thank you very much for having me and allowing me to present. Caution, it's only a very preliminary stage.
Well, you have our support, and always let us know how we can help get the word out to push it forward, Maurice.
Amazing. Thank you very much.
All right. Take care. Stay well and stay healthy, Maurice.
Have a good afternoon. Stay healthy.
Everyone, that is fabulous, really important information you just heard from Maurice Hirsch, the head of the legal department of the Palestinian Media Watch. And again, and I just want to emphasize what he said at the end, that he and those working with him on these potential laws to bring up on Israel's Knesset floor, working very hard to ensure that it has a vast majority of votes on the Knesset floor, both from the coalition and the opposition, which is very, very good news, because this is about truth, justice, punishing terrorists and standing up for victims of terror who unfortunately don't get enough justice. So this is really, really a wonderful and very, very important initiative. And to all of you, thank you once again for watching another episode of The Pulse of Israel. Signing off from the eternal and ancestral homeland of the Jewish people is Avi Yebelo. Take care.
Pulse of Israel, frontline videos from the Holy Land. Support our work by donating today.